Is a hot dog a sandwich?
If it's in the middle of two buns, it's got to be a sandwich, right?
It's not one of the sandwiches that's sandwichy enough that if you pointed at it and said, what is that? Sandwich is an acceptable answer, right? Like, you have to say hot dog.
So is a sandwich just anything with something
like
else on the
sandwiched
other
in
side of
between.
it? So am I sandwiched between my clothes right now?
I think so.
All right, let's do it. It's PoddyC time. It's PoddyC time again. It's episode 11. This week, our cat is out of commission, so we've replaced him with a different cat, an equally
New cat.
as exciting cat. Welcome to the PoddyC, Growl.
Well, what are you guys talking about? This is Dorky here.
Dude, also known as Yummy TV, also known as Pete Zergling. We have he goes by many names.
Prodigy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well done,
Prodigy's
Prodigy guys.
rising.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this week, Growl or Dorky is off in MDI prison. He should be. I think next week, our episode will be right after the MDI weekend.
That's a great. Yeah, we're actually recording this a few days before you guys will be listening to it, but we had so next week should be fresh off of what hopes to be a really interesting weekend of MDI. So a bunch of easy free content to react to there. So
Yeah, now this week, our tentative plan is to talk about like season 4, do some cooking on ideas and stuff for that, but who knows what direction the conversation might go. It's a little bit less structured. But I guess to start it off, does anybody have any big wish list items, any hot takes to jumpstart the discussion here?
Well, I don't really have any hot takes. Well, about like season 4 ideas or just
Season 4, 10-2... Oh, okay, how about this is a starting point. 10-2-6 we know is coming soon, and it's going to have season 4 included in it. And there's not going to be PTR testing for 10-2-6 until it goes live. And there's some stuff in there that's cool that people will, they think, be excited about. And then at some point later, season 4 will be activated, and that will be PTR testable after 10-2-6 goes live.
Oh, yeah. True, yeah. So I guess when season 4 is coming out, it will be under 10.2.6. It's not a new patch. I think 10.2.7 is like that time running thing.
Yeah.
It's like a extra patch. So basically, no one knows what 10.2.6 is other than we know it comes out in March. We know that they did clarify that all you need is an active WoW subscription. They did not even mention needing to own the expansion of Dragonflight, I believe.
It says classic or Dragonflight players, although presumably whatever's happening will happen on the retail client because that's the one that's actually getting patched. But like I've seen some speculation that maybe stuff would happen actually on the classic realms and stuff, but that seems I'm skeptical of that.
Well, did it have 10.2.6 on the classic roadmap?
No.
I don't think so, right? It was only retail. I think it has to only be on retail.
But maybe it'll be something you can do with like a new character or something, like, you know, level scaling or something like that, so that if you are a classic main, you could play.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
that I think you're on the right track. I think it is basically in their wording. It's making me think that it's some kind of low level or new character thing that you wouldn't have had to have previously played, or even, as they put it, literally own Dragonflight to participate in. So it probably is something like that. And I have no clue what that even could be. Like, I kind of thought about what they had done in Classic recently. Like, they did this hardcore mode, but like retail hardcore would just be, I mean, if they come out at 10.2.6 and it's like level to 30 in retail hardcore, I mean, that would just be awful content, right? You just instantly level to 30. Maybe some kind of, I mean, even like solo self. I don't even. What would it be? What could it be? If you don't even enter the Dragonflight zone, what cool thing could they be hyping up like this?
Well,
like what even?
Like Mage Tower could work. Some kind of level scaling, you know, little solo challenge thing, along those lines could be doable. It'd be weird to have it be
level scaled, right?
Well, but so you could be something that's not like based on your class, but some kind of scenario. We assume there's some pirate theme going on, so I don't know. Maybe there's some kind of like solo player or small group content or scaling group content that is not based on your character's gear, and therefore you can just queue into. Although, yeah, level scaling Mage Tower specifically would be weird with how ability based it is.
What do you think, Growl?
One feedback that I feel like everyone's given about WoW is that there's so many old dungeons and raids and stuff that don't get used. So it could be something, it doesn't really fit the pirate theme, but it could have something to do with like a new way to interact with older content, and that's why it sort of doesn't matter what expansion you have, right? Because they're doing, I don't know if it's dungeons or raids or what, but maybe something to do with that. I would have to guess. I don't know. I was kind of downer about the idea, like that it was going to be some super cool patch, and now they're like saying all of the right things to hype it up. It's kind of weird though because I feel like they are doing and just did Season of Discovery, right? And that kind of fits that whole idea of like leveling a new character or like somehow changing the characters. So that's why it's, to me, it seems like maybe it has to do with the instances, like the dungeons and raids, rather than, you know, leveling or affecting
It kind of
your
adds
character.
up.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's maybe like an overall theme for their content waiting for the new expansion to come out, because like that's what people think time running pandemonium thing is going to be similar to that too, right? In 10.2.7 is, you think it's something Mist of Pandaria related. Time running is like a more advanced thing than time walking, so maybe it's like them bringing back some older raids or dungeons and making them relevant again. Maybe it's challenge modes again, which would be kind of not very great, but like I could kind of see it just kind of fitting in with that theme, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, they are in the new expansion. They're going to be adding the warband stuff, the transmog being usable on people of other armor types. So maybe it would kind of make sense to do something to change the way that we interact with legacy dungeons, because right now people who run legacy dungeons and raids, generally there are people that do it for like Invincible or Mimiron's Head or whatever, and so it's like 1 or 2 dungeons that they go to farm very specific mounts. And then there are some people that are like trying to collect all the transmog or whatever, trying to get the battle patch or something like that. But maybe this is something that they're looking at as like a, you know, what if there was just, you know, world quests or whatever that rotated between all of the old dungeons and amped them up or something and made them kind of interesting little single player things to do, and targeted a different one at different times or affected all of them in some way to kind of make them more of a thing you could do instead of flying around Valdrakken aimlessly when you're bored.
Yeah, I don't know how they could add on to it though, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like time walking is essentially, okay, you scale it and then you can redo it. Like what else could they do? That's sort of where I get stuck, is like what sort of spin could they add to it? But I feel like with a lot of the stuff they've done recently across the board with like with Dragonflight, with Hardcore, with SOD, I feel like they're on the right track and coming up with good ideas. So I'm pretty optimistic actually that, you know, maybe I just don't know what they're gonna do and we're not gonna expect it, but we're gonna enjoy it. That's kind of like best case scenario.
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think I have a, you know, I have a good feeling that it'll be good. But also the time running thing, like, oh, time walking, what could they do? I mean, there is something unique about time walking. It's never been even remotely challenging. It's like LFR difficulty thing that exists. So I mean, there's definitely a line where you could bring back older content. I'm not even talking maybe even remixing a lot of the abilities. Like you could bring back a raid from MoP, like Throne of Thunder, and try to have it equal maybe like a touch under what Mythic is now, maybe a little bit above where Heroic is now, and that would be a interesting way to interact with that content that is decidedly different than how time walking is interacted with, you know. But then like rewards would have to come with that for it to make sense, kind of thing. And it can't be too hard because then it's like alienating a lot of people, and it's not even like main patch content, right? So
yeah, it's tough because like Mythic in particular, you know, if you create something that's like 70% as much as Mythic is, it's maybe still too coordination intensive for people to pug it, but then the guilds aren't actually going to want to go and do it, right? Like if you think about stuff like Time Walking Firelands or whatever, Time Walking Ulduar, you know, those are usually puggable and pugged, and guilds don't really do them as a guild. If you made something like that but harder, I worry that maybe it just wouldn't get done because people that wanted to pug it wouldn't have the coordination to do so. And
yeah, why would a guild do it?
Exactly, right? Like why would a guild do it? Even if 15 people in your guild want to do something, you know, getting another 5 can be a serious, you know, challenge that a lot of guilds, I think, are not gonna bother trying to browbeat 5 raiders or pug 5 people to do that kind of thing. So it's tricky. That would be a tricky challenge, but I think it could be cool if executed well. I think maybe making sure that it was flex sizing instead of locked to 20 would be really good if they wanted to do something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I also, before we get into season 4, I did want to get a brief idea from you guys about the new hero talents and like kind of the direction they were going. Not like, I don't want to like break them down and like get you, but like I just like general. I think, how many do we have now? Do we have 8 of them? Something like that. Is it 7?
I think we have 8. Yeah.
I think we maybe got 4 times, and then we got these 4 recent ones. I
Yeah.
know that I've spent a lot of time thinking about them. I haven't listened to them yet, but I saw that you released a few videos giving off your impressions of them. What are just your like general, what are your all's general vibes from the hero talents so far, as like an addition to our talent trees that we got this expansion?
I think that the thing with these hero talents is that they've kind of been all over the place in terms of like there are some serious outliers in terms of complexity and like obvious power. Like, so some of these are coming with very powerful defensive things that I think would affect high keys and mythic pushing. Stuff like just giving you an 8% DR on your regrowth on yourself, or the Chrono Warden like hover for a 30% DR. Obviously that decays very quickly, but you know, if you could press that at a timed well, that could be huge for surviving
Super
one
strong.
shots. So
Yep.
for something like high key pushing, I think that is going to be extremely impactful, whether or not you get a hero talent tree that offers you something like that. And then there's also a lot of support themes so far. Chrono Warden, Lightsmith, and Oracle all kind of play into support playstyles. That's 3 of the 8 that we've seen so far, and feasibly more of them could land in that as well. So are they trying to create more support niches based off of augmentation, or after augmentation came out? Is that something they're looking to expand? And then the other thing that kind of jumped out to me was some of these trees are going to require very little maintenance or thinking. Something like Dark Ranger Hunter, you know, you just kind of press button and then it'll light up an extra button sometimes, and you press that button too, and you're good. And then Frostfire Mage, on the other hand, is offering you like all of these synergies and interlocking pieces of the kit that offer you all these extra ways to min-max and stuff. And my initial response to reading them was like, oh my god, Frostfire Mage looks so cool and Dark Ranger looks so boring. But given that we already have all this complexity from talent trees themselves, which are being frequently reworked from set bonuses, it's possible that that's actually going to feel overwhelming compared to maybe some of the simpler ones. So, but maybe it's good if there's a mix, right? Because you can choose between 2. So maybe it's good if you have an option between a complicated and a simple one. I don't know. These are several different just initial reactions I had to reading through them.
What about you, Growl?
I think it'll be sort of like talent trees where some of the classes are just like dead on, and it's like they really did it right, and you feel like you have variety of choices and different things, and then other classes will be like you'll kind of wonder what they were either going for, or there'll be like, you know, a tree that is only really like good in PvP, or like, you know, some sort of like open world thing. Like without going too in depth, you know, one of the talent tree they added for Druid Healer relies on the new like treant abilities.
Yeah.
And that's kind of polarizing, because some people who do a lot of dungeon healing like them because it gives you more on-demand healing, but it's also like not really about druid hots and, you know, heal over time and damage over time, and it doesn't really fit the druid aesthetic, and a lot of the older school druids don't like that. So I think it will be cool if the other one is now all about hots and about like, you know, building up a bunch of heals and then having it ramp, and then the other one is more like on-demand healing and direct. And I think that if they can manage that with as many classes as possible, where it feels like there's different ways to play it, and they're sort of balanced, so you actually feel like you have a choice, as opposed to just, oh, well, you know. But I'm a little worried that some of them are going to turn into like, well, this is the best single target one, this sim's better, so you always play this in raid, or oh, this is the only one that gives you AoE, so I have to play this in dungeons. But if there does feel like you have a variety in what you can play, and they have different play styles, I think it'll be cool. I just worry that they might, like, I feel like the talent trees already add a lot of complexity, and I want to see what they do. Like, I wanted to add on to current archetypes rather than like add more complexity and different things that you have to worry about, because I think rotations are already like very, very complex for most classes. And I think like augmenting the current abilities, and like, or even simplifying current abilities might be better than trying to like add even more stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're definitely right. Also, like, just imagine like what you said, right? Oh, well, it's okay if the tree version of the Resto Druid hero talents is like a tree thing, but the other one is exactly this other playstyle. But then what happens if, just like with many other classes, the tree one is you really want to play HOTS and the tree one is just a 5% HPS increase, and it's like you're just playing, it's almost like Covenant different tier of like play style and emphasis, where you're forced to make a choice between that. But also, like, if they just make a lot of good ones, then it's there. I think also some feedback I've got from the community, now this is not true of all talent trees, but like some talent trees still feel like they need a lot of cooking. It's kind of hard to tell right now in current retail, but what they're going to look like going into War Within. I imagine the talent trees, there's still, I don't know, I want to say like maybe they've reworked or retouched like 60% of them, and the other 40 are just kind of hoping that like alpha and beta comes out and it's like, here's these massive changes for your class, that are needed. So people are like, okay, well, hero talents are coming in, but I'm sitting here wondering where my last expansion's iteration is going to feel right for me, like it does for these other classes. So I think that hero talents have a little bit of abrasion to them because people just feel like they haven't finished the other talent tree yet. Dratnos, you mentioned defensiveness, and I think that is the main thing that stuck out to me, is that it seems like in most of them they're trying to give you some defensive options in them, except for a few of the classes. But I actually got that. Like, so I think this is a way for them to kind of balance the scales of defensiveness. Like, we saw Hunter and Druid recently get some really nice quality life stuff for Hunter, and then Druid's is kind of just good. Like on-demand 8% DR is solid, right? And you're also healing yourself at the same time. But like, I could see it defining what you pick as well as being like a single target or AoE thing. They need to make sure that every defensiveness is really important. Like, if you're a hunter, a BM hunter, and you're choosing between Dark Ranger and whatever, that other thing better have defensiveness that is just as good as that. They're kind of locking themselves into that, because what'll happen is not just, oh, this thing's 5% better. Oh, this other one's really good for Mythic Plus, but if you don't have Survival of the Fittest DR on Exil, you literally can't live this fight in a Mythic Plus dungeon, That's the exact kind of defensiveness that lives those things. It's either like extremely high verse stacking classes, or it's classes with a bunch of buttons that can make you live and you just rotate them, right? That's like rotating Exil for a defensive is huge, right? So them balancing that will be hard, but I think it is a good spot for them to kind of maybe balance the defensiveness in this game a little bit. Like, for example, did mages get something defensive, like DR related? They got some utility kind of stuff defensively. Did Frostfire, which is probably by far the best tree so far that they've released hero talent, that's awesome. Did they get something defensively as good as like the Hunter or Druid one? I don't think so. Like, you could argue the moving during Ice Block and the resetting of Ice Cold when you cauterize and stuff like that. But dude, I mean, that's mages, if there's a class that doesn't need more defensive help, it's that one. So like, maybe this is a spot for them to, give some defensiveness through certain classes in the tree. So I hope they really focus on that. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is kind of theme.
Hold on, I want to talk
Go
about
ahead.
defensiveness real, because I actually feel pretty strongly about this.
Okay.
I feel like there's a major defensive creep in the game right now, and I think that talent trees caused it, in the sense that too many classes have way too many abilities to live, and it's no longer okay, here's maybe like one, oh no, something happened to me, I pressed my one button, my ice block or whatever. Now it genuinely feels like, in order to play the game at the high level, you have to constantly be cycling through tons of buttons, and like, boomkins are like always bear forming stuff, and I feel like they really need to calm down, because the problem is when they go to make difficult content, harder bosses in heroic or mythic, or it ends up being like you just have to play literal cooldown Tetris of like, okay, on this I use this, and then this I use this, and like I was playing Disc Priest on Fyrak, and it's like literally every blaze, like I have so many different ways to press all these different defensives, and it seems cool, but then it's like, well, if you don't press them, you just die, because it's supposed to be a hard boss, and it's like, I feel like there's they're moving way too much power away from healers into like other classes.
Mm.
But the problem, the reason why that's bad is, well, they still need to make it challenging, so they need to make all these crazy high damage mechanics just to pull out all these defensives out of your character, because every class just has like 4 buttons they can press. I get that not every class does, but I really think what they should do is start toning down these classes that have 4 buttons instead of giving the other classes that don't. Now everybody has 4 buttons. I think they should start weaning out some of these classes that, like mage or like monk, for example, that just have way too many abilities they have to cycle through.
No, I think you're I don't think that's really realistic, even though I think I would agree with you. Like what do you think the chances are that they identify this and they kind of like tone down or remove one defensive from most of the super tanky classes? It seems impossible to me that they would do that.
Not likely, but I mean,
but no, I think you're right though. Actually,
yeah.
so Thune or Thune, how do you say his name? Is it Thune?
Thune, I think.
He likes either one. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've
I'm sure he
used
likes
either
when
one
we
with him, and
change.
he doesn't get mad.
Okay. He made a great video, and I'm sure both of you know what I'm talking about, where he kind of talked about why healing looks the way it looks now versus how it looked in the past. And man, I mean, I don't even play healer, but you can see in the past how each individual, and this goes into big time when we were talking about resto druids and hots, is you had so much more expression over a health bar over a period of time, and it didn't mean the content wasn't difficult. It was just the way that the damage is being dealt to you. And as the expansions have gone on and defensive creep has happened, to challenge players, there has to just be more upfront damage and more one-shotty things, and that leads to the issue you've had this expansion where healers feel like they need their cooldowns up or else everyone's just dead all the time, and damage dealers and whoever thinks they need a defensive to live every single mechanic. So like I agree that like going in that direction is just like more healthy for the game in so many ways. But I also, it doesn't seem like it's going in that direction. And also I think part of it is Mythic Plus. Like in Raid, it was better in previous expansions, but I don't think it was as bad. I like defensiveness. Like for example, in a Mythic Plus, you really feel that shamans have astral shift every minute and a half or something, and then they have actually nothing besides turning into a dog outside of that, or Earth Ellie, I guess. And then, forget pressing faint every whatever many seconds, but like rotating through the amount of cooldowns that monks have, or mages, or a verse stacking warlock. You just don't have the same amount of buttons. In Raid, you can get away with this. In infinite scaling Mythic Plus, it's always just something where those classes are going to really majorly struggle because it's about the amount of buttons. The boss is going to yell every 15 seconds, "Can you live?" And all of them do 120% of your health. How many classes can fit this extremely niche defensive profile, right? Like that's like not something they should probably balance around, but also something that can be mitigated by changing the way that like damage is applied to you and stuff.
Yeah, well, I do want to add to, the first instinct is to say that it's a high key problem, but it also creates a massive delta between, like, let's say you're doing, middle of the road keys or like 20 keys. The difference between playing with somebody who's a good mage and who's pressing all their defensives and playing with a random guy who doesn't press anything because he's still learning his class, which is fine, right? I'm not expecting everyone to be perfect, but it's just like absolutely mind-blowing for healers who also really aren't that good and who are still learning their classes. Like, random people are just taking random absurd amounts of damage, and there's all these things you need to be tracking and whether or not people press them. Like, I do think, while I complain from a sense of it's annoying for one-shot stuff, I think it's very overwhelming for people trying to heal or just live in even middle-of-the-road content too, because of like how big of a difference it makes. And that also brings into account, like, well, okay, you get weak auras, you get the targeted spell weak aura, and you mash your keyboard every time you see it light up, and it's like the difference between having somebody who does that and the same person who just decides they want to play at natty and doesn't want all those noises on their screen is going to be massive.
So much of that goes back to the way that damage used to be done to you too. If damage is less one-shotty, if the ability to be good at living and dying was predicting whether you were about to get one-shot or not, and it was more your health is going down in smaller increments, still really fast, but like you have the ability to like use this big visual indicator on your screen of your health bar to react and use defensives. If there are less of them, which is just, it's exactly, again, I encourage anyone here to watch the video. Maybe Frank could put it in the description. He loves doing stuff like that. And you can go check, like you used to, the way you thought about using defensives before was a little different than now, and it's because what was happening to you was more visual than just like, oh, all of a sudden I'm dead because I did not proactively think to use this thing, right? It was a bit more fluid in the way that you received damage in previous expansions. But like tying that all back to hero talents, though, I do think if they're not going to do a global reset of defensives, which is a philosophy change, I think I largely agree with your take on it. I do think it is an excellent opportunity to, because you talk about class trees, mainly class trees that threw defensiveness out of whack in WoW, in Dragonflight, and that did kind of lead to a massive move in that direction, right? I mean, they like nerfed healers or something like 3 times the extent. Like so many things were weird with that. Hybrid classes had too many tools. That's because you used to have to choose between dampen, diffuse, and some other shit, and then you would just like Dragonflight launches, and just every choice you used to have is just all there. And for some classes who just had more choices before, regardless of how many you could take at the same time, you just have more tools now. A way to rectify that without just going back and just looking at defensives overall is to, you know, look at the few classes in the game, which are, to be honest with you, are not a lot. I actually think it's like shamans and druids, really, maybe alone, and where they could
Maybe
use
priests.
some,
Yeah.
maybe healer priest, yeah, like where they could receive some defensive help, and they could just give them like a little bit more love in their hero talents, and it would make it a little bit more balanced. But I don't know how they would handle it.
Yeah, another thing that strikes me as weird about this is it seems super strange to have like a 3 expansion horizon on these, because that's like long enough. So that of course they could change this in either direction, right? If they're received horribly, they could audible out of them early. If they're received super well, these could be permanent. That I'm sure is.
You mean hero talents in general?
Yeah, but it like
Okay.
as a feature, they I think they said the goal was for this to be for the 3 expansions of the World Soul Saga, like medium term borrowed
Oh,
power.
really?
Yeah, I
Wait,
think they said
I
that at
did
BlizzCon.
not.
Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, I assumed this was like evergreen style from Dragonflight kind of thing, but you're saying like this is a
I
you
think
will
they
be
said
these
that at
heroes.
BlizzCon. Yeah, that
Okay.
it was like that.
Well, I mean-
Again, I don't think they've like hard committed, and obviously, even if they did, they could change. But
Yeah, they could change. It'd be like a
yeah.
Diablo season, right? Like if for whatever reason by the end of the 3 expansions these slap and are
Mhm.
just like core to WoW and they're great, like they're not just gonna be like, well, the 3 expansions are over. This
Yeah.
thing's
Oh,
gone,"
we
you
promised
know?
4 years ago this. Like, no, everybody they obviously wouldn't do that. But I mean, I think that there's a decent chance these will hit pretty well, because I've seen a lot of people like comparing them to Covenants and to Soulbinds. But to me, these are like way more class thematic. And like
yeah.
Soulbinds were just completely untied to anything so far in the game that any player identified their character with. That was like, hey, we're going to introduce you this character like Klaya or Pelagos or whatever, and here's what they do, and you're like, okay, right? That doesn't feel like anything. But becoming a Keeper of the Grove or a Dark Ranger or Pack Leader, all that stuff, like those are, to a greater or lesser extent, things that a lot of people playing those classes already do somewhat identify with or like the idea of. And some of these trees, I mean, again, us reading the Frostfire tree, I think, trepidations about the complexity aside, it is a very exciting premise, and I could see like being a, you know, that being a fun permanent addition to the game.
Dude, I could see Frostfire like being the most fun version of Frost or Fire that's ever existed so far. Like instant cast filler, but also it has like complexity with buff management. Like, oh man, like it the comet storms and meteors going off each other. It's gonna look insane too. Like I don't know, like that. I saw that and I'm like, okay, I have a total new appreciation for what is possible with these. But then it gets released at the same time as Dark Ranger, probably one of the most bat chesty things where like people who are like old time WoW fans are just like, oh, wow, Dark Ranger. I've always wanted Dark Ranger. Like people have wanted it as a class and stuff like that. You know, but then you read that and it's got the theme. There are like dark shadow cats coming out of your abilities and stuff, but the way it plays isn't very transformative, and it's a little just like damage happens. So it's about finding the balance between them. But you are right in that the themes seem to be just so much more spot on than what Covenants were trying to accomplish with all of those things.
Yeah, the Dark Ranger one is pretty weird to me. Like that one, especially seems like a pretty big missed opportunity so far. Now, obviously, there's room for, iteration over this cycle, but a lot of people I think have pretty have had different problems with it. Like one is just a boring tree, perhaps. The other is why it's not survival. Given that Black Arrow used to be a survival ability, given that survival and Dark Rangers with Sylvanas and stuff have more of a melee identity, and Sentinel has owls as the whole Sentinel owl thing, and they're not BM and Dark Ranger is, and so that one I specifically found weird, and I also found Lightsmith to be really weird reading it. I was reading Lightsmith, and I'm like, man,
I really
this
don't
doesn't
like
sound
it.
fun. Yeah,
Lightsmith and Oracle for me are like completely go back to the drawing board level of I just don't think it works, and hopefully and I could be wrong, but like hopefully they realize that early because they do have time to go back and recook those things. So. Well, before I mentioned Oracle, what was we're not going to talk any of them specifically. What was your all's take on on Oracle?
I like the buff stuff. I know a lot of people who compete in raid and care a lot about the meters don't like those things, but I actually think from a healer support person POV, buff stuff is cool. To me, the way it works seems very, very clunky. The idea of like, all right, my warrior popped his cooldowns. Now time to give him the physical buff. Okay, this one gives me mana. Okay, this one gives magic damage. Okay, this one gives tank DR. Okay, this one gives increased healing. And then by this time, like, the guy's already pressed all of his buttons, and it's like, I think they need to go back to the drawing board, especially with how it works. Like, how they sort of say that it's almost like a roulette sort of thing where it goes slowly and then you pick the one that you want, but it seems so not fitting with WoW, and it also seems very, very clunky to play. So I think that's my biggest concern, but I don't necessarily mind. I know everyone gets upset about the buff things, but I think they play really, really cool in PvP. I think they play really cool in M+. All but, 20-man rating where one person is the king because their class, you know what I mean? Like different weird interactions in raid. I understand why it's annoying in logs and stuff, but I think in M+ it plays very fun to have buffs that you can help other people with.
That was my impression of the tree. I think how they handled Og was a bit problematic. Just a few decisions they made. But in general, I'm not like really, really anti-support in the game. But I have a huge issue with how gameplay seems like it's going to work with Oracle. And I know in the interview they said they had like a less ambitious version of it. I would definitely go in that direction. Like even on the left side of the tree, there's a lot of interesting interactions with what they can do with Palm. Right? Like there's some cool ideas with like what Prayer of Mending could be for Disc, or how that would interact back with Holy. Like that they have some juice there. I just don't think the core gameplay of that spell just seems very good at all.
Yeah, I understand the issues people have with supportive playstyles, and I those aside, I think that Oracle and Lightsmith both represent less fun ways to do support. If we want to do support, I think there are ways to do it that would be better than both of these trees have offered so far. So I hope that at least they change them to be more fun versions of support. And I'm indifferent about, or I'm ambivalent, like I'm pulled in both directions about whether or not there should be this many support trees in the and so much support in the game, because like Growl said, there's definitely a lot of positives that come from it. A lot of enjoyment that gets generated, but also a lot of problems, depending on what kind of content you're doing.
So much of the negativity around support has had to do with a lot of non-support things. And here's what I mean by that. So the main reason Og was like really disliked when it first came out, when logs actually worked, was that it was just too good. It was just had too many defensive skills. I still feel like going forward, augmentation, not having... We talked about this on the pod the other week, but like not having things like spatial paradox, or them having it in devastation, not having it is very similar to like Feral and Moonkin, one having innervate and the other one doesn't. Like you just can't play one of the specs in raid kinda. But it was just too strong. It was like the best DPS in dungeons, and it had more utility and defensiveness than everyone else. And they've nerfed almost all of those things to where, it's much more of a competitive choice now. There's still an issue with dungeon scaling currently, where the difficulty of timing the key doesn't scale properly with incoming damage. So it's really hard to like AUG is still just kind of good for that, but there were some issues with that. And the other one is now logs and details are completely wrong all the time, and I think that, like you said this earlier, Growl, about like, oh, it's like a lot of people in raid and like competitive people and stacking it all in one person. There is a lot of sentiment against that, but I think there is someone who is not a parse fiend that is just playing the game, and they finish a poll and they're like, I think I did really well there. Glance over to details, and you just have, for the first time ever, no clue how well you did. Maybe you're at the top. Oh, I checked. Oh, what's my buff up time of Ebb and Might or whatever, right? Or like you think you did really well, but like everyone above you is just getting Ebb and Mighted, and I don't know, like it's just, and then you're like, okay, but it's fine because logs are supposed to work, right? And then logs don't do that either. Like somehow we have, like, it's still not being talked about that much. I feel like as much as it should be, that the log hooks in this game are just completely wrong, and no one is, and you can't tell how well you're doing. And if you're getting ogged in game, you're getting extra value on Warcraft logs because of it. And you can't actually, for personal performance, you can't see where you're at. And I don't think it's like a super like ego thing. I think it's just like something you do when you raid. You just you constantly check your own performance and try to beat it, and you just have no clue. So I think
I actually think that's a good thing, and I think that there are like, not everyone wants to not everyone wants to constantly look at their performance, right? Like it's not like this is a problem with every spec in the game. Well, the problem is the meters are staring you in the face, right? You're doing it every pull, and if you don't know it, then the other people on your radar. Well, my point is this a little bit. One thing I really enjoyed about playing healer when I was starting off was that it didn't really feel like there was a competition. Like I just had to keep my team alive and do the mechanics, and that was it. And it's not about, oh, how much HPS I did in the dungeon, but like if I was starting off and I had played rogue, and every single dungeon I do, I just see the other two people doing way more damage than me. It's like more discouraging, and naturally just because I enjoy that support like playstyle or whatever. But I think that's a problem that you guys might run into because you're sort of at that very high level of, even your AUG evokers enjoy super min-maxing. You have people like Goop or whatever who are just like, monsters at the game playing those. But I think for 99% of people in guilds, the AUG evoker is like that guy who you don't want to see how they're doing on the meters, and you're happy just having his stuff messed up, and he's not going to look at it and you're not going to look at it. And like, that's the sort of the role for that type of person, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say there definitely is like a set of the player base that enjoys there being basically a smoke bomb cast on the details meters. And it's like, all right, the pressure's gone, right?
I mean, there have been games who have deliberately made this decision. Right? If you see a game that doesn't include a damage meter on purpose against all feedback against it, it is for this exact reason. They want the player to not have to worry about it being a competition. It's like whether you kill the boss or not, right? And then also we have to keep in mind that all of us as players, and then also all of our communities and the people we surround ourselves in, are very geared towards like high-end play in the game. Those are people who paid a lot more attention to Twitch streams and Twitter and stuff. Those people are all massively more into that camp. So a lot of the feedback you'll see as a streamer, or just in general, the loud feedback you will hear is all like, for example, these hero talents, tying this all back to hero talents, they are clearly going more in the support direction. It's not like they did PI and then they did AUG and they were like, wait, let's pump the brakes, people are mad. No, they are pressing the gas and doing more stuff, right? Which tells you there's two things. There's either you just think Blizzard has no idea what they're talking about, or they, as much as you have heard negative sentiments about support, the general consensus among the majority of the WoW community, a lot of which are pretty silent about it, is they actually really like it. So, or there is a lot more room for people that want to play support and look forward to it. So it wouldn't be that surprising. Alrighty. Enough about support. Enough about these hero talents. I want to hear what you guys think in the season of cooking. They did it last time, so it's not even some copium. They heavily cooked last Fated season. I am interested in what kind of cooks you guys want to see, and then also just in general, what kind of content you want to see them do in this patch. We haven't heard really anything from them about it. And I kind of want to start with raids. So last time in Faded, they had all 3 raids come back from the expansion, same as this expansion. I assume they'll do the same thing where they bring back all 3 raids. They had them come out 1 week at a time, and you couldn't like go into one that you had just progressed last week. And the way that they made it more difficult wasn't just tuning up the eye level, but it was adding affixes into the raid. So just of those things that you guys interacted with, what stuff did you like? What stuff should they do again? What stuff should they avoid? And all that.
So I have like 2 pretty clear good and bad parts. So the best part by far for me was the lower difficulty of it. Like once you got the affixes down, like you still got the benefit of getting to raid with the boys and hanging out and your weekly meet up with your guild and joking around and stuff, but it wasn't like super stressful. Like you always had infinite DPS to beat any of the mechanics, and it was like it felt good. It almost like classic raiding or whatever, right, where you basically just run around, meet up, you hit the loot pinatas.
You mean the heroic version of the Faded raids is what you're saying?
Even Mythic, right?
Even Mythic I think was quite once you got the mechanics down. And then that goes to my part that I didn't like about it, was sort of the reprog of not only the mechanics but also the affixes with the mechanics. Like, I don't know, I almost want my cake and then have to eat it too, or whatever that phrase means. Of I want the buffs from the affixes, but I don't want the hard parts. Like I like that the raids
no
were
kiss
easy,
curse, just
but...
kiss. Just make me more
yeah,
powerful.
exactly. Like, I don't know, I feel like if you are in a guild who's been around the whole time and you've done all these fights, you should be able to just breeze through them on the redo, You shouldn't have to like learn, what do we do when these debuffs go out and we have to dispel or whatever.
Yeah, I think they did a reasonable job of that last time. Maybe it was like a little annoying on a few fights. There were a few affixes that could get kind of weird with it, and the affixes seemed to be this weird middle ground of like not super impactful but kind of annoying sometimes. But so I don't know, maybe there's room for a recook on what kind of affixes you can get for these. Like maybe
so
ones
you guys
that
are
just crazier.
You guys are fans of affixes, though. Like, you guys would say, hey, if you're doing Faded Season 4 again, you should not only bring the dungeons back, but also add affixes.
The raids, you mean?
Yes, correct.
I guess they don't need to be there. I think that if they do bring them back, they could definitely make them better, because I think they were mid last time to maybe slightly worse than mid.
I don't know if it was the affixes they chose or if it was affixes in general, because we don't have enough sample size. This has only happened once. But I felt like the affixes added nothing to that season. Whether it was because they were mid or it's because they existed, I feel like in that Faded season, you could have removed the affixes and it would not have affected the season negatively in any way.
Yeah, I mean, I liked blasting the bosses, and to some extent, affixes would let you set that up, right? There were a few fights where you could get the big power amp and then lust and nuke the boss, depending on which affixes they were. But I think they could just give that to us more. Again, like you said, no curse, just kiss, and just have each dungeon have like a different empowerment, or each raid have a different empowerment each week, where it's like, oh, in this one your lust is twice as strong. Oh, in this one, if you do 10% of the boss's health in 30 seconds, it gets stunned or whatever for 5 seconds. I don't know, like,
yeah, something like that.
Just different kind of like buffs to.
Yeah, I actually think that's a banger. It's a banger, because that's not something sustainable, right? You could never do that for every single raid, but I think it would be fun, and it's absolutely something you can do for like an end of the expansion recap to like, oh, let me see this raid because I missed it because I was busy. But, I'm not going to weigh my guild down, or we're not going to, because we have 8 new people or whatever. Like, oh, exactly. Like, or what if you got 2 charges of bloodlust for a fight, or, just little things that would actually be fun to think about and to strategize around, but also would just straight up make the fights easier.
Yeah. How about the part with one raid rotating each week? I found that to be really weird, but I don't know how you do better than that, because I feel like all 3 being open is also weird.
This lives rent-free in my mind, because when you think about how, and again, what Blizzard's going to change are the things that affect the majority of people. Oftentimes what we hear is not a huge representation of that. What I heard a lot when I asked my chat deliberately about this was like, how did you guys feel about the raids rotating? And this is the only sentiment I got. We would raid. We are a 2-day raid guild. We would raid on Thursday and Monday. And then, what a lot of those guilds will go through, if you talk to them, is like, yeah, a bit of Monday is like reprogression because you have to remember what you did 5 days ago and then you have to do this, whatever. But then what happens is they end that raid on Monday and they get halfway through Fated, Mythic, or whatever. And then next Thursday, they're like, all right, let's finish up the raid. But it's just a different one. And then they have to do the same thing. And then they have to do that. And then another week later, they're already back in that raid and they had forgotten everything they did 3 weeks ago. And they're like, so for guilds that like you and me who said, you're just going to go in there on Mythic and just clap it real quick and get your loot. And it's like loot pinata, have fun season. For some people who are logging in and just doing their Mythic raid, I don't know exactly how many people this is, but there's a section of people where this is hell that they can't just choose the raid they want to do and do them in order. But that's the easy solution in your head, right? Like, oh, well, just let them go back and choose the other raid to do it on Fated. But then you open all 3 Fated difficulties right away, and now you're like raiding 3 days a week or like more than that. Like you feel obligated to kill like just like 100 bosses in a week to like get started in the season. And it's like, it's kind of good that they restrict you from doing that. So I have never found a good solution for this in my head other than those people just getting fucked kind of. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Maybe it's like 3 weeks and then it rotates, and then 3 weeks and then it rotates, and that way it's like it's the same raid for at least a couple weeks in a row, something like that.
But then there's a trinket that someone really wants at the beginning of the patch, and they can't get it forever.
Buy it with dinars. Buy it with dinars. Bring back dinars again.
Oh, that's another topic for just after this, I think. But I don't know. What were you gonna say, Growl?
Oh, I was just gonna say I feel exactly the same way. I feel like it's definitely awkward the fact that the raids rotate, but I don't have a really good solution. I guess, yeah, it definitely feels annoying, right? Because when you make Mythic easier for someone that clears Mythic, okay, this is great. If your guild only does Heroic and, okay, this is great. But what if, your guild does Heroic and then does a couple of the Mythic easy bosses, right? Like you almost feel obligated, because this is such a great source of gear and your guild normally doesn't do Mythic, to try and ram your heads into these bosses, which are easier, but relatively to your guild's ability is still very difficult. And then it's like, yeah, it definitely creates kind of a weird thing there. But yeah, I just don't really have a solution to it. So I think most people aren't super like into this season. So I think a lot of people don't really mind it. It feels a little awkward, but it's kind of like, yeah, whatever,
Yeah. Also, something I heard from just before we move off the raid thing, something I heard from my chat today is they're like, this is my least favorite season because it's like the only time usually in an expansion I get cutting edge is like the super long end of expansion patch. And like now that's ended. But then it's like kind of weird. It's like, okay, well, I was looking forward to the whole expansion to get the cutting edge tier where it's like twice as long for some reason so I can get cutting edge. But then it's like, okay, that's probably not a massive amount of people that are like cut off by this. I don't even know how much cutting edge matters to people. Yeah, so I don't know. Just the whole rating thing, I don't know if it was fully cooked last time. I think how they decide to do rewards, because you have to keep in mind that like how rewards worked in the raid was like kind of like a little babby upgrade system. Like you could get heroic versions of items and then eventually you get these like tokens that turn them into not even dinars. Like you would just kill enough mythic bosses or something to turn any specific item into mythic, which I think was like a spiritual predecessor to what our upgrade system is now. I think it was, pretty clear cause and effect. So like maybe they cook a little bit more on that. I think looking at the gearing system, we can kind of go into dinars and all of that stuff. If there was one cook I want them to do for gearing is right now in Mythic Plus, there is a clear... When dinars came out before, they were asked multiple times in interviews, hey, can we just have these all the time? And they're like, no, the reason we gave you these is because there's like these rotating raids and it could be a couple weeks and it'd be super hard to get. And so that's why we gave it to you. Okay, well, that's true. You do get the raid every week, but a lot of people want specific items from Mythic Plus, and it is insane that in the year of our Lord 2024, if you want to get the best Mythic Plus trinket for you at 489 item level on the Mythic track, you have to hit a 3 out of like 95 or something in your Mythic vault, and it is extremely common that you will never see any particular item in an entire season. And there's no like bad luck protection or anything, and there's no way to target that stuff. there's so many different cooks about how to do this, so I'm not even going to waste a lot of time going over how they could do it. They could do it with vault tokens. They could do it with, just so many ways you could do this. But I hope there's some way within a season, doesn't have to be really early, but some way where you can choose any specific Mythic Plus item, and get it on the Mythic Plus track. And I think that it should transfer into the normal game.
Yeah, I agree that should be just an evergreen feature. I also think it would be fine if it was not for the first 5 weeks or whatever of the season. Like, there's a lot of gear, dinar type system things that I think it would be fine if you didn't have for the first month of a patch or whatever. But later in the season, it's just so annoying to be like, well, I don't have a 489 of this trinket, and this person does, or like a special weapon, like a Nick of Time if you're a rogue, the dagger from Fall, whenever they make those type things. Really huge. Even just 6 eye levels, like, just psychologically, it feels so bad.
Do you think that whole concept of, oh, what if it came 2 months into the season is actually just a cop-out from us? Because think about the creation catalyst, right? Like, we were like I think that was a feature where beforehand we would have said the same thing, right? Like, oh, 2 months into the season, if you're unlucky, or 1 month into the season, you don't get your tier set, like, you can use this, and everyone's like, oh wow, that's so great, yeah. But then you get it, and it's like, well, I just want this now, actually.
That's true.
Like, I don't want this to be 1 month into the season. I just want this now.
Well,
and I kind of feel like
that's because we experienced
know...
it, and it was like, oh, this is great, but look at how many people quit before it ever came out, And it was like,
but see, this is what we do. We tell Blizzard we're fine with it being late, and then once it comes out, we're like, well, this just has to be here from the start.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
fair enough.
It's
back that shit up.
It's you give a mouse a cookie or whatever thing, or yeah.
The reason that I kind of backed it up, not at the beginning of the patch, is one of my cooks about this is through like vault tokens, right? Like, if you miss a vault or whatever, right now you can get a socket. Okay, cool. Well, at a certain point in the season, you don't really need sockets, and you don't really have anything to do with those, and it's very likely that you miss your vault. So like, what it could be is like 18 vault tokens or 12 or something, and you could pick literally any item in Mythic Plus, and it just is Mythic track, and it's just yours, and you get it, right? And then the reason why I said it should come out a little bit later as like a baseline for any other system like this is it would be really stupid if people were like incentivized to like be bricking their vaults on purpose early in a patch to get a specific item. Like, that's a terrible gameplay thing, right? But you could solve that by just having it come out later, or just get the number right on like how many things you would have to skip to actually get it. But also, Dratnos is right, where we can trick them into being later in the patch and just be like, haha, turns out it was even better than you thought, so give it to us now. You can do both.
All right, how about the dungeon side of Season 4? I also want to say, we've already kind of got the impression from them that it was going to be Dragonflight raids. We haven't heard about the dungeons, but I think there's some assumptions, or that's something we actually could discuss more.
It has to be the Dragonflight dungeons, right?
But at least on the raid side of things, I think it would be cool to do more legacy stuff during a Fated season, but I've kind of already baked that out of my assumptions because they kind of already said Dragonflight raids.
Exact same.
So that's something maybe in a future Fated season or whatever, if they ever do it again, which hopefully they don't, but if they ever do, then that could be cool. On the dungeon side, yeah, I mean, all Dragonflight dungeons to me seems like the obvious thing to do, because it feels like we haven't gotten enough time, right? We've only had one season of each Dragonflight dungeon so far, which maybe in the old expansions when you had 2 full years of a dungeon, that outgrew its welcome for some of them, but only 6 months of some of these dungeons I think is not enough. Like, I think that they're not old yet, and so we could have all of them for a full season, and that would be good.
It would also, that seems to be the prevailing theory, is that we're getting the mega dungeon again and all the Dragonflight dungeons, which would also mean we're having a 10 dungeon season for the first time in a very long time as well, which is also something that I've heard Mythic Plusers pretty routinely say, that whatever number they've landed on for the number of keys in a season being 8, in that, I don't know what the exact number is, but a few more than 8 feels good. So I wonder if they'll get a lot of feedback from that too.
Delete Halls of Infusion.
We can leave Halls of Infusion out.
I feel like when it comes to not just Blizzard, but like game devs in general, they're never gonna like backstep or admit that something is not good or that they messed up or whatever. But like, I would really love for them to just be like, okay, these were the 2 least popular dungeons that people didn't like. We're just not going to put them in the last season. Like, I think that would be a huge win.
But then it's subjective, and then it comes to like a vote.
No,
Actually,
with Halls of Infusion, it's not.
it's not subjective. But on Blizzard's side, I really wonder if they feel that way. Like that's actually I don't know. Would you guys be okay with, like, just as a theoretical scenario, voting out the bottom two as a community? Because I feel like there's like this voting stigma because of Grimrail Depot. And people are like, oh, well, if you give the community the option to vote, they'll just like do the stupid thing, like they don't know what they're talking about. But like Grimrail, it made sense why Grimrail won that poll. It was like a really sick challenge mode dungeon. So like people voted for it not as a meme, but because it's a good dungeon. And then like it had some issues with affixes that didn't exist in challenge mode, but they ended up taking it. And then recently they voted on tier sets, and that went surprisingly well. And as far as I could tell, not a single spec in the game got griefed when it easily could have. So I mean, maybe they just do. Is voting bad? That's what I'm asking.
I think voting is fine as long as when you're casting the vote, you're the person that undergoes the result. I think that's totally fine. Like, I think it's a weird take to be like, yeah, voting is good unless they vote on the thing that I don't want. Then everyone's stupid. Like, that's a little weird. I don't like, so for instance, the MDI one of, vote on their affixes. And it's like,
I did that. I did that
XDD,
MDI,
like
bro.
double sanguine, tyrannical, double tyrannical. That's what I vote for. Like, that's not okay.
Fortified Raging Necrotic Waycrest Manor, which was a affix combination that didn't even exist on live, that Blizzard had voted onto our tournament.
I see nothing wrong with. I think it would be cool if they built it into in game, so it's like, okay, if you have an active sub and you're logging in, then you can vote. And it's like, one thing I think an interesting tie-in is you mentioned bringing back old raids. That might be the solution to what we were talking about earlier of what if they put up 5 raids and then the whole community could vote for what the end of expansion raid would be, and they kind of retouched it up and then they re-released it at the end instead of doing the recap raids or whatever. That would be cool.
I think it'd be weird in the long term of things though, because like Classic is already doing these. Like, for example, imagine choosing ICC or Old War. It'd probably be pretty unlikely because like people just did this in Classic. Where I mean,
yeah, that's true. Actually,
I didn't mention this when Dratnos brought it up, but this was actually something I wanted the most. Like, just imagine they brought back Throne of Thunder, but because they're bringing back Throne of Thunder, they're not doing the other 3 Dragonflight raids. They're not coming up with affixes or whatever, and they would just like make it actual current difficulty. You're going to be progressing this for a couple months, right? They can make it a real raid, which it is one of the best ever as, right? And then that to me just sounds like an infinitely cooler patch than what they're doing for Faded. But because of Classic, I just really doubt they would ever do it. I don't know.
Yeah,
like Classic's kind of filling that role.
Even Throne of Thunder, like that's gonna come out in Classic in 2 years or something, right? So like,
oh my gosh, I can't wait for BFA Classic.
Oh yeah, BFA Classic login.
That's the thing. That's what people are gonna forget, dude. BFA Classic's gonna come out, and people are gonna forget that literally all of their takes and Mythic Plus takes about BFA are from 2 very specific seasons, and they're gonna like log on BFA Classic with fucking Infested, and they're gonna be like, "Let's fucking log in, boys. I missed playing Motherload," and you're gonna have a hell of a bad time. So,
God, it would take a while. Yeah, teaming Motherload. Have fun.
But dude, season 4 BFA Classic would be a absolute banger.
So as well, they could take. What if they just took Awakened or something and put it in season 4 of Dragonflight? I feel like that would be a slam dunk for me. Like, especially if it's all the Dragonflight dungeons. We've already all got experience with them. They're not new dungeons, right? It's not like that we're seeing something like Throne of the Tides for the first time as an M+ dungeon. Those could they could pick like a good old seasonal, or 2. They could have 2 good old seasonals and rotate between them each week instead of Tyrant and Fort. And that could be like the thing that shakes up dungeons this season. And I feel like
the
fun.
Seasonals have to be very specific to the set of dungeons. Like, for example, Awakening, everyone remembers that because it was exactly what BFA needed. But like, okay, imagine you put Awakened in No-Code Offensive. Like, what would you even do? It would just be like, you would be randomly fighting mini bosses. So and
also you don't need to skip anything anywhere, I guess. Like, skipping stuff just doesn't accomplish much in most dungeons. You do it like 0.
You would like hope that they added one at the end so that you could not have to do the dragon riding thing, and that would be about it.
It's an interesting solution to the seasonal problem where, seasonals have made the best Mythic Plus has ever been in this game has been with good seasonals. but also the worst it's ever been was with really, really bad seasonals.
Yeah.
So the way to solve that is you keep seasonals and you just only pick the really good ones you've ever made. And you
just don't make bad ones.
Yeah,
let's tell
don't
that
make
to Blizzard. We figured it out. Just
Yeah, actually,
don't make
this is the
bad
same with hero
ones.
talents as well. Just do good ones and try to avoid
Yep.
bad ones. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, that would help a lot. And then the whole, I actually do like the idea. Well, okay, you mentioned Awakened, but like, okay, Awakened's very specific. You can do Encrypted. You don't need shit
Yeah.
for Encrypted to work. It just, you could, like, if you don't need to skip anything, that's fine. Just kill the CDR boy and or the guy with the gun.
Encrypted and Shrouded, I think, were both cool that they could do in basically any set of
Mhm.
dungeons.
Yeah, I mean, that's, well, maybe, okay, so this is kind of tailing into a different conversation, which could be a pretty long one on its own, but when you're wanting them to cook in season 4, I think there's a lot of people who are looking for some kind of affix reform in the War Within, or maybe a keystone system involving depletion and the way that you enter keys. I think there's room to iterate on all of that, right? Mythics Plus has been out for 8 years now. Is that number right? So
Yeah.
or about, is it about to be 8 years in the fall, which is an insane number. You know, I don't know. There's definitely a world where that stuff can look different. If you guys were to want them to cook and try something, like they rotated dungeons in last season 4, and I think that largely led to them doing that in the expansion. Like, what kind of Mythic Plus cooks would you like to see them dabble with? I know Dratnos had a really good cook about this recently. Like, what would you guys want to see them try to do?
Yeah, I've thought about this quite a bit. So I think when it comes to affixes, I think any sort of affix that isn't the seasonal or Fort Tyran, I just don't really like. Like, I think they're just slowly backpedaling to easier and easier affixes to the point where it's like, what's the point of even having these? Because they don't really change the flavor of the dungeon. You know, it's like entangling and volcanic and all this stuff where it's like,
Yeah, you want the ones that have the least possible effect.
well,
on you,
right,
so
and
why
they're
have them
doing
yet?
that though. They're also doing it. It's not just the players are asked for; like they're also doing it. So I think they should honestly just scrap or try it in the season 4 to scrap everything but Tyran, and then have a thematic seasonal affix. And then hopefully with that they can iterate more on the seasonal affix so that if it's not great at the start of the season, I think that they could make it good eventually. I think that would be like that's probably the number one thing that I would be very, very happy to see in season 4 is if they try that and they say that that's what they want to do. A bit of a stretch for content, but one thing I think would be cool is like people really like challenge modes, and I think the idea of a specific dungeon level that you enter and then it's about how fast you can do it, sort of like MDI, instead of something that's like how high do you push it up, I think would also be cool. Like, I think if they had it so you can step into any dungeon at like a 20 level or a 22 level, and there's just a leaderboard of times and that just exists alongside Mythic Plus, I think that would be something cool for them to mess with that I don't see why that couldn't be in the game for people like JB, or for people who, you know what I mean, who want to play with their friends and work harder and get better at the dungeon, but who don't want to, like, sort of the problem with M Plus, right, is you run into the situation where everything one-shots you and it's like miserable, right? But I mean, like, that's how it has to be. It's infinitely scaling. You know, you're playing against other people who are trying everything they can to get further and further, and it's like, well, you know, what if I want to do harder dungeon content, but my idea of harder dungeon content isn't trying to get a tank trinket on my freaking priest, you know? And it's like, okay, well, what if they allowed you to do dungeons really fast and like do MDI? I think that would make MDI more interesting and relevant as well. If the average civilian could go into, you know, a whatever to try it with their friends, and like, you know, you had some sort of cosmetic or like, you know, gold or whatever.
Is that like speed running 20s or something, or is it
yeah,
even lower?
basically
Yeah.
somewhere where the mechanics matter, but at the same time, like, things aren't as punishing and you can pull big and go really fast. Like somewhere in the neighborhood of like 20s, I think 20s to 23s.
Okay, Dratnos, what was the idea you had? It was like really simple, right? Wasn't it like just inverting the affixes for the season?
Oh yeah, a season where just they took all the existing affixes and made them do good things instead of bad things to you when they procced, like volcanic that healed you when you stood in it instead of damage to you, and like a bolstering that made
Sanguine
mobs
does damage,
weaker instead
yeah.
of stronger, and like, yeah, that I think would be
Like the existing infrastructure is already there. It would probably be easier to make work. Yeah, I really liked that idea when I heard it, is because it would also get the like positive kiss curse thing, which people talk about all the time. It would just, just for one season, what could happen, right? Just like see what that looks like. But I also feel like that's like a you can never go back moment. I feel like, and maybe this is a good thing, but I feel like as soon as you do that, imagine they're like, all right, that was a good little test. We're gonna go back to Sanguine now healing the mobs again. I mean, it would be crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like, it would never happen.
That's the only reason I don't necessarily like that suggestion, is because I really think this is such a freaking valuable time for them to cook and try stuff and see how it,
Well, I don't think that would be bad. I think it could be good. Like,
I just don't see them ever doing it.
Yeah,
Like,
I
maybe it's true.
agree. It's
Maybe
like,
well, I think a big issue is a lot of people don't really realize it now, but previously there were good weeks and there were bad weeks, and the delta between those was so big that you literally wouldn't even waste your time playing on bad weeks. And that has gotten so much better, and I think they do actually care a lot about the balance in between week to week, and to encourage people to keep playing. And the problem with every kiss curse idea or beneficial affix is that just going to blow all the work they just did over the last 2 expansions out of the water, and be like, there's going to be one affix that's just literally insane. And it's like, especially think about the interactions between bosses too. Like, what if one affix in one dungeon on one boss saves you 3 minutes in the timer, and it's like, okay, well, I'm not even going to step foot into Everbloom unless it's this week because it's this affix. And I think that they don't like that idea as well. That's where I always run into problems with thinking about how to make beneficial affixes. Some might say, who cares, right? And maybe that would be more fun for everybody, but
I think it is a very valid concern, because D4 has some like positive affixes, and there's definitely some that are just like way more OP than others. And
yeah.
Well, even if they weren't, if it took them, years to tune these new positive inverse affix to be the same level of this is a bad week and this is a good week as you have now, that wouldn't be worth the time it took to do that, right? You would just be, like you said, you would be creating a problem that you just solved.
Yeah,
Right.
but it would maybe lead to a more fun endpoint. But yeah, I agree.
True,
It likely would create a huge balancing problem that they've just spent years trying to fix. So I'm reminded of when Classic came out right after they overhauled the auction house, and then the auction house on Classic just broke like every day for a week. And I was just thinking, like, imagine being the dev that did all the overhauling of the retail auction house, and then like Classic comes out, they're using the old auction house architecture, and it's just completely bricked again. You're just looking at it like, man,
What is my life?
Yeah.
I actually have a thought about Mythic Plus, and I want to get your all's takes on it. So a lot of the time there's this big disconnect in between what people complain about in the game for high Mythic Plus or even mid-high, like 25 plus, where they're like, how are they not addressing this? And I think for a lot of people, when they say like, oh, I get it, we're like the small part of the game. Like, if you look at the amount of people that are doing keys above 25, it is, the people talk about it like it's like 20% of the people doing Mythic Plus, and I think it is like an extremely small percent. Like, I mean, 0.1% is doing 27s right now. So 1% would be, I don't know, a bit lower than that, right?
The top 1% right now is 3250 IO in NA, which is the worst region.
What is what like general keystone level do you think
26s, yeah.
Oh, not even 26. My character has like 27s on average, and I'm 3550.
Yeah, 3K is all-time 20s. So
Okay.
3250 is
That's like 23s maybe.
23s.
Yeah, 22s, 23s. Okay, so that tells you that when you're making arguments about, oh man, this ability is like super BS and it's one-shotting us, that you have to keep in mind, like when you're making those arguments, you're making an argument for 1% of the total Mythic Pluses are being done. And if you ever look at the way that game companies prioritize how much time they spend on things, it is certainly never for something that affects 1% of people, right? Or very rarely. And I'm wondering if there's a way for more people to kind of bridge that gap. So what you see a lot of people doing in Mythic Plus is they go up to 20s. That's like the best gear you can get from your vault, I think. And then it also gives you portals. And there's like this clear reward structure around getting to 20. And 20 is like the end goal. But they've never really done anything for, it is an infinitely scaling game mode, but there's no reward structure above 20s really that makes it worth your time to do that. And what that leads to is you'll find people that are a decent amount of people on 25s, 26s, and 27s, probably less than there would be, but they exist. But that road to 25 doesn't exist because there's really not a point. There's not a point to go from 21 to 25. Like from 26 plus, you have the title, I guess, which is, again, I still don't think there's really enough rewards for that, but there is something, but there's nothing in between. So there's like this massive void of keys in between there. So what I would like them to do this season, and maybe I want to hear your all's takes on it, is come up with some reward structure that goes above KSM and is maybe below the title and bridges the gap between 20s and 27s, which will increase the amount of people doing higher keys, which will allow the issues that high key players face being affected by more of the community, and maybe we'll get more attention. Because a lot of the things that you complain about, if you're like, okay, let's see what 99% of the people are doing. Okay, it's 22s and below. Is this thing that I'm complaining about an issue on a 22? Usually the answer to that is absolutely not, because you're the issue you're running into, as much as it may seem to be a specific mechanic, the issue you're running into is a perfectly fine mechanic under normal tuning that you have just infinitely scaled and is now. So this is a bit of maybe a newsflash for people. When you have infinite scaling at a certain key level, literally everything is bullshit, right? And then one key level below that, everything's bullshit except for this one mechanic. And like it's so hard to tune these dungeons where at a certain level this one thing isn't bullshit, but then this other thing is. It's just infinite scaling, right? Like it's gonna be bullshit. That's the whole point. So like I think maybe broadening the reward structure to get more people involved and give people a reason to, because it's pretty good content. Like I think giving people a reason to do it above that, other than like this super hard to obtain, probably 1% title that has pretty minimal rewards. Anyway, what do you guys think about that?
I mean, I'm never going to complain about more rewards in M+. I feel like they've done a great job. You know, again, playing since BFA, portals weren't even a thing. Like the top 0.1% title wasn't a thing. Like you literally just did your weekly key and that was it. And there was no dungeon score in game. You know, there was no myth track or like hero stuff that you could upgrade. Like there was nothing in BFA and people still played it. I think the argument of, oh, it is only the X% of players thing is kind of bogus, because I mean, like, what if more people would play it if it didn't suck? You know what I mean? Like, how many people do you think are like good raiders and they tried Mythic Plus and, you know, maybe they played with some friends for a while, and then it's like, okay, well, you know, I'm re-rolling in Shadow Moon Burial Grounds for 7 hours.
Oh, that's totally different.
And then
I'm not referring to the key re-rolling system.
Well, I'm just saying, like, in general,
specifically overtuned mechanics is what I'm referring to. But you're exactly right.
What I'm saying is that, you know, if they made higher in Mythic Plus bad, then more people would play it. You know, like it's like it wouldn't be oh, this is only a problem for this small subsection of people, because, well, maybe only a small subsection of people will play it because it should be a lot better.
Well, yeah, but like, okay, so there's things that affect everyone. So like the key re-rolling and depleting system and affixes, which is most of what we talk about, that affects people from the top all the way to the bottom equally. And that is why something like that gets more attention than like a specific mechanic at a 28 that starts one-shotting you 1 or 2 key levels too early. Like that's one of those things, which is most of all problems, affects everyone and they're more likely to address. And then there's another one, which is something that is talked about frequently for weeks on stream. Like, how has this not been nerfed? And it's like, well, this is the one thing that, like, you know, Blizzard's kind of, I imagine at some point, Blizzard is just like, okay, in high keys, some shit's going to get crazy because it's infinite scaling. And there's some level of just like outplay that. And yeah, like sometimes that thing happens 2 key levels too early, but that's something that they're never going to address. But if it's like affix related or keystone system related, which is maybe something more they could cook on this patch, it's something that you can practically expect them to actually address because it affects everyone on that spectrum at an equal level.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think an easy solution to that too, though, is they need to make keys gated by doing the dungeon fast in time and not one shot. You know, like you say, okay, there's a point where everything in the dungeon is bullshit, but that's actually not true. Like if a dungeon was really, really hard to time and you had to pull big and like, you know, go fast and do tons of damage and nothing in the dungeon one shot you or was insanely unfair, that's, I think, an attainable place for the dungeon to be. But the problem is, like, it's hard to tune that so that it's like that for the highest keys and not like that for, you know, it's hard to make it so it's like that in a 28, and then at a 20, it still feels like you're doing a real key and everything isn't super easy.
I don't have much. Okay.
Well, I was just going to say another thing they could look at in the season is maybe play around with it a bit and be willing to experiment, but try to find a better scaling metric for health and incoming damage. Like that right now, I think they scale exactly the same, right? The exact same percent. I think it's just off a little bit, right? Like it seems, I don't know if this is every season, but this season specifically, it seems like time becomes difficult multiple key levels later than extremely high difficulty of incoming damage. And that could probably be made to be more consistent.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true, and it definitely has gotten worse this season. I know some people are against the idea, but the problem with scaling HP is the fight duration. Like, let's say you're scaling the HP of everything more and the damage less. Well, you're still going to run into the problem where there's these bosses that take 8 minutes or 7 minutes. And I think that one thing that they need to do is either just design shorter dungeons in general with timers that are 30 minutes or under, and or also like maybe at some point, like this is kind of, is JB sort of had this idea of like the timer goes down instead of the mobs go up. I think that's a little bit extreme because I think people like the idea of the mobs getting up, but maybe it works both ways. You know, like the mobs get instead of the mobs getting way stronger each key level, maybe the mobs only get a little bit stronger each key level, but then the timer goes down, and maybe only start that with keys above 20. Like, I think one of the big problems with systems in Mythic Plus is that everyone interacts with it in a very different way. Like, there are people, like you said, who are pushing for title. There are people who only want to get to 20. You know, there are some people in the abyss of the in-between. And I feel like if they made keys work differently for keys above 20, I think they could solve those problems without impacting, like, the player base of people who don't want to, like, you know, work really hard in dungeons and care a lot about M+.
I will say one thing, rewards aside, there's currently a punishment for going from 20s to 23s or 20s to 24s. Like, if you're somebody who's capable of pushing 24s or farming 20s, you will get less aspect crests by a lot if you're trying to push 24s instead. Like, if you're pugging in the group finder, the average success rate of a 20 is close to 100%. The average success rate of a 24 in group finder is probably 50-50. And when you deplete a key, you get, not only do the higher keys take longer, but you also get less than half of the aspect crests from that run, which I think is catastrophic. So I like the idea of adding some extra rewards to incentivize people to push in that range, but I think just taking away the stick as well as adding a carrot would be really good, making it so that you don't lose at least as many crests. And I think it would be fine to not lose any crest if you complete a key and it's out of time. I don't think that needs to be one of the ways that timing keys is incentivized.
Oh, also, this is not about season 4, really. This is more like something they need to cook for later in regular seasons, which is that crest acquisition and or upgrade costs or something. But your ability right now to re-roll to an alt should be somewhat of an expedited process over, I think, your main. I think that's something that it actually leads people to play the patch less, because the barrier of entry of getting that character caught up to speed with everyone else's characters at a certain point just becomes a ridiculous amount of playing the game. And just a little help there would probably allow people to log on more characters and play. I had one thought, Growl, about your dungeon thing. I think we'll do a Patreon question after this. You mentioned like higher keys. Oh, well, like if you like cap it at 25, that's kind of extreme. And then also when you have higher keys, the bosses can just take 8 minutes. And you really wonder, is that bad boss design, right? To me, immediately it jumps out as yes. Because like if you have an infinitely scaling tyrannical boss that has a shield or a timed phase or an add that every single key level not only is taking longer to kill, but it's also at the same time doing more damage to you, right? Like those have always been really problematic. But again, as opposed to an affix problem or a keystone problem, you're now looking at, it's literally only at like what I'm just bare minimum. What do you think? Like a 26 or 27 or 28, where that becomes something that is so noticeably a problem, where you're doing a boss for like any longer than a couple minutes.
I think it extrapolates more. Like, I agree. Like, okay, you're not fighting a 7-minute boss on a 20, but at the same time, like, You
If
know,
you were, it would be
I would
changed.
say I
That's
would
what I'm
say a
saying.
boss like a Ridicron, for example, if you, even in a pug, like if we're not talking about a group that's way over geared for a 20, like a progression group on a 20, like I bet a Ridicron takes a long freaking time. I bet that boss takes like 6 minutes or whatever. Because like, you know, people aren't optimizing their damage, they're not breaking the shield the correct way, like they're not like, you know, understanding stuff, like they don't have the right classes. I don't know. I feel like it is. I mean, I agree with you though in the sense that it is bad boss design, but the problem that I have is I just think that's sort of in the category of things that Blizzard will never change. Like I think the problem is the people who design those bosses are not the people who play or care about M plus. Like they're more thinking about
Well, we
how
know
is
they are,
someone's
though.
first. Well, no, I think a lot of the bosses that they design, they're thinking about, okay, this is the first time someone entered this dungeon. What is their experience on it? Or
No,
like
you're
the
right.
second
Yeah.
time, you know? Like I think,
Yeah.
and I agree, the two, like I think what happens is they design the dungeon and then they get tuned accordingly. So I mean, like I feel like just some bosses just seem so hard to tune if you have a scaling shield or like a scaling anything.
Yeah, exactly. But Blizzard doesn't want to sign on to, okay, we can fix this problem. Just none of our dungeon bosses, which by the way are already really hard to make unique because they're so simple, that like we can just never make an ad spawn or a boss have a phase or a shield. It's like they're not going to do that, right?
Right. Yeah.
So like where do you find it? And actually the other thing you said is like, oh, well maybe we cap it at 25 and this will, you know, that's like JB's take is there's no more health and damage scaling over 25. You know what would feel really bad? Trash. Because there's only basically anytime Mythic Plus you're doing a pull for longer than like 3 or 4 minutes, it's just like, why are we doing this pull? But that only happens on bosses, right? Like my concern with capping things at a 25 is that trash wouldn't even be fun from like a DPSer's perspective. Like 25 trash gets obliterated, right? Like no one's complaining about doing trash from a 25 to a 30, right? Usually you can find a way to deal with it. They're susceptible to all kinds of CC. You can simply just pull less if it's too hard or whatever, right? But like it's usually bosses that actually create almost all of the friction when going into like super, super high key levels. So like as far as like capping something or scaling it, maybe they could do something to bosses that's like separate than trash maybe, but that's like maybe getting into too much of a cook. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think, let me be clear though. I think the idea of hard capping key level is bad. And I think that that's what makes M plus is the fact that it's infinitely scaling and each level things get harder. I just think that, I think the system would be more smooth if they also reduced the timer while they did that. And then they made each level less steep or whatever. But yeah, I didn't really consider that you know what I mean? You're having these insanely geared, insanely good players who on DPS, and then like, you know, the trash just blows up in 20 seconds. Like, yeah, that wouldn't be that. I don't know. The problem is like there is MDI though. Like I think MDI trash pulls can be fun. So I don't know. Yeah, it definitely isn't. It's something that needs to be cooked. It's not, you know, it's half baked right now.
Okay, do you guys have any other thoughts on potential cooks about season 4, not necessarily Mythic Plus dungeon gearing or whatever related, before we Patreon question?
Delete Halls of Infusion. Oh, also, all right. While I'm being a downer, also they changed Azure Vaults. So Azure Vaults became one of my favorite dungeons in season 1, where essentially it turned a very long linear dungeon into something you could do different stuff in, because you could jump off of the platforms and then land, you know, and you wouldn't be forced to pull the trash pulls that they wanted you to pull. And they made all those zones like death zones now. So you can't do any of the jump off shenanigans that you could do before in Azure Vaults. And they're going to bring that dungeon back, and everyone's going to be very, very sad.
Oh yeah, good take. Oh, maybe one other thought. I've heard season 4 criticized before because it offers almost nothing for a casual player as opposed to a normal patch. Maybe some of that comes from a misunderstanding of it being called season 4, but it's not an actual season like season 3 was. But do you guys see any concern with that? Or like, because it seems like season 4 is a like less intensive work for them than making like a brand new raid and like a brand new zone and stuff like that, right? And like those are the sacrifices we get. Raiders get hard sacrificed and casuals get hard sacrificed. But is there anything they could do to maybe to make that better? I don't know.
No, I mean, that's just like I'm angry at the situation thing, like it's not like the problem is the alternative isn't, oh, here's this great new raid and this content that we're not going to put this out, we're just not going to do this. We're going to do season 4 instead. Like that isn't the option, If the option was, oh, let's drag out, the option is, oh, let's drag this on for a year. And the thing is, those casual people wouldn't play the end of the expansion anyway. Like they're going to move on and play other games and wait for the new expansion release. So I think regardless of what they do of their current options, they're just not going to hold that player base of people who want to try new stuff, are going to chill for a little bit and then bounce. Like maybe they might play season 4, I guess. But I mean, yeah, I think that's just unavoidable.
Yeah, I mean, those players are looking for novelty for the most part, and that is kind of fundamentally what they don't have, and they're doing season 4 instead of. I mean, they could try and duct tape something together, amping up the rewards and like putting a little bit of a fresh coat of paint on all of the outdoor world systems of the expansion so far. Maybe even bringing back old ones in the same, if they ever brought back old raids.
Maybe they are.
They could bring back like Molten Front again or something, some old, casual zone. But even just ramping up Forbidden Reach and Time Rifts and Primal Storms all to be relevant again.
That sounds great.
That sounds like relatively easy and doable. So maybe something like that. But I agree that probably just wouldn't actually retain very many people. So might not be worth it.
Yeah, because a lot of it is for the story. But I mean,
Yeah.
you could make those zones more relevant. Yeah, or maybe just bring back like maybe every time you do this, you do like a little Brawlers Guild or Mage Tower thing. But you have to keep in mind that maybe 10.2.6 Pirate Black Flag thing, maybe that's exactly what we're talking about right now. We just have no idea what it is. So, all right, cool. We're Patreon men.
Patreon question. So this one's a long one. I'm going to summarize it rather than reading the whole thing out because I have pre-read it because I saw that it was really long. So this one comes from Civilian Raid Leader.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's so long. It's like insanely long.
It's a good question though. So basically, this person co-raid leads a guild that gets cutting edge each tier, and then their next goal is to get the bench cutting edge. And this takes 1 or 2 more kills, depending on how many raiders missed the first kill. And they've had some trouble with this. So on Sarkareth, for instance, they took 300 pulls to kill it the first time, but then they took another 100 kills to get the second re-kill because they had a raid leader on holiday, a couple players and healers left, and they had a bunch of class rerolls. They changed strat, and they obviously had all their bench in as well. And so that plus a bunch of people already had the kill, so motivation was low from them. Focus was down. There were a lot of people who weren't getting anything out of the second kill. So then the question from us or for us is, what tips or tricks do we use to manage morale in our raid when we see regression or similar bad vibey problems? What are good tells for raid leaders and officers to pick up on declining morale? And me as morale officer in my guild, which is mostly a meme title.
Is that what you are, the morale officer?
I've declared myself morale officer, but it doesn't come with any specific responsibilities besides me saying I'm in charge of morale is a bit whenever people are getting down. I guess and also like, do we have any thoughts on, I guess, that situation? Because to me, something big jumps out, which is don't change so much for your second kill. Like, don't change 20 people, 2 strats, and
we don't do that.
Yeah.
So like when we go for re-kills early in the patch, like usually we will kill something, and then we won't even have a single new person kill it for like 3 to 4 kills later, because it's like no one wants to deal with that. Now we're under a totally different situation. I understand that. It's not like, we're doing this for competition. We don't care how fast these other people get their things. We know they're eventually going to get it, whatever. But like the idea of even us, we're a very good guild. If we replaced 4 people on like a mythic end boss or 5, and we tried to re-kill it next week, it would be absolute agony. That's just too much to change, right? And it's just inefficient, because you could change 1 person and probably re-kill it next week, depending on their role. And then maybe next week you're comfortable with that. Maybe you do another one, or maybe 2. And then you would have gotten those 4 people their kill faster than if you tried to do them all at once, maybe in some cases. So I would say just that you have to really keep in mind how many people you're changing out and how much of an impact that has on a raid boss. It's usually pretty massive. And I do have a I want you guys to kind of give more input on that because I think you guys have been in guilds where you have dealt with this more than me. But I do want to mention
guilds.
yeah, just
I'm the
world
civilian
14th
guild
or something,
master.
just completely
yeah.
civilian. Yeah, what's up?
I'm the civilian guild
Um,
master. I know all the stuff this guy's talking about.
Actually,
I
you
just
know
went
what?
through
Go
this.
ahead and get into that. And I have something to add specifically on the morale and the regression thing. But I think we should probably stay on the other thing before I have a long tangent about that. So what do you think, Growl?
I have a lot to say about morale too. I guess that was most of it. One thing I'll say is for you, again, you made that suggestion of like, oh, don't change too much. In almost all civilian guilds, you don't have that option. Like every single tier, the raid is
Oh,
over.
yeah.
Like there are people leaving. You've subbed out people. Like people have left mid prog of Tindril and of Fyrak and after Fyrak, and you have sometimes 8 new people in your roster, and you don't have the option to, you know what I mean, not change stuff.
Bro,
Like,
if you have
and-
8
and I-
new people, the option is you quit. That is a GG.
well,
like
the person
Don't
in
tell
this
my
question is
guild that
also
we had 11 new people in this raid. But I would say one solution
Oh
to
my
that
God.
is I don't have a lot to add about solutions to that, but like start small. Like don't sit here and go, okay, this is now we're gonna re-kill Fyrak. Like just get to Smolder on. Like what we did literally this week of like, okay, we got to Smolder on, and then we figured out some stuff with Weak Aura, and then like that's it. Like we're not even gonna mess with Tindril, we're not even gonna mess with Fyrak. Like let's just get these new people integrated, get to the point where we can smoke every single other boss. Because I think a lot of what civilian guilds struggle with is getting to the progress part, right? Like they don't have that level of consistency where they spend so much of their weekly time re-progressing over like earlier stuff too. Like master that stuff before you worry about, okay, let me, you know what I mean? Like try and maximize your time that you spend on the hard part so that even if you do take longer, it's like, well, okay, we allowed ourselves to take longer.
Yeah, that's what I do. Like in my guild, we take a sizable break before we re-pull the end boss, and often there's like a nerf or something that comes in between our first and second kills, and that makes it a lot easier to do it the second time. And yeah, to some extent, there's stuff you're not going to be able to avoid changing, but like don't change your strat between your first and second kill. Like they talked about intentionally changing from the liquid strat to the no-go down strat, and like that's unless you are convinced that it's going to be better and easier because of nerfs, basically, I don't think you should ever do a strat change on your second kill.
Yeah.
I do think also though you want to kind of gauge the raid team and be like, all right, look, because on the topic of morale, if you have people that are going to be like downers about being in the raid and they're like, I don't want to be here, you're making me do this boss that I don't
That's
need.
super bad.
Like that's going to be really bad. So you need to strike a compromise, and basically you need to make sure like, okay, look, what if we take an extra week off? Right, we'll take one more week off, but then everybody agrees when we do come back, like we're actually going to play all of our nights. We're not going to try and quit early. We're going to try and kill this boss for the people on the bench, right? And like if you just explicitly ask people to do that rather than kind of not saying it, a lot of people will kind of realize they're being little babies about it, and they'll step up. But if you don't do that, then sometimes it can kind of fester, and people will just start being, you know, like grumbly and like, oh, what's the point? We're never going to kill this. Those kind of vibes, and that is really, really toxic.
Progression is a long, arduous task, and for so many people in the guild, they handle that differently. But the feeling of killing the last boss is often excitement, but sometimes it can be relief. It can be, this is over. They're not at that moment. They're not thinking, oh, it's not quite over. We actually still have to get this kill for other people. That is nowhere in their mind. It is, we are finished. We have completed this thing. I'm so overthinking about this raid right now. So like getting tasked with, so like next week, make sure you're here right away, and we're going to do this again. It can be like, oh man. And then like they never get a chance to reset. And then then you have like that one guy in your raid who's just complaining about the fact that you're doing this. Oh, and then you changed your strat. Okay, well that's bad enough. But then now also everyone's questioning that. So like there's no confidence in what you're doing. And yeah, like it could like go a lot of different things. So I think Dratnos had an excellent point of hitting a compromise. Hey, there's a new game coming out. Maybe we just we'll see you guys in like 10 days. But when we come back in 10 days, we're gonna get these kills for these people, and you would want that too if you were on the bench, and then hopefully you come back and it's fine. Those were great takes from you guys. I do have a big take.
Yeah, give us the cook
on
on
the morale though. So 2 main points. So what tips, the TLDR basically from him was, what tips and tricks do you use to manage morale in your raid when you see regression or similar bad vibey problems? So that's a big question. That's not just when you've killed a boss and you have new people in. That's just all the time. For me, it's very simple. You need to always be solving a problem, right? So if you end a pull and you have like you talk about something and it's like, oh, we could have changed something there. We know what went wrong. And like, maybe we can move this. The vibe is usually great as long as there's always something you're progressing towards. The pulls that feel horrific are if you ever allow yourself to feel like things are going wrong and there's nothing you can do about it, and there's no small, even potential small thing you can change. Like maybe you guys know that feeling where like you know exactly what you need to do, and it's not like, oh, some people will just make mistakes, but it's like you just don't get a part of the fight as a guild and you just keep wiping to it and no one's saying anything about it, and you just go again and you're like, dude, like what the fuck is going on? Like we have to figure out something about this. So I would say just make sure if you're leading a group or if you're an officer to just always try to seem like you're being productive. And not try to seem like there are ways to be productive. You don't have to be a world first guild figuring out literally how to do the fight. Within your guild, there are tons of small problems to solve all the time about what people are doing, where they're standing, stuff like that. And then the second point, which is something I think, a lot of North American guilds, I think, need to try harder to do this. English-speaking European guilds, specifically Western European guilds, are actually really good at this on accident because due to culture differences, they're more direct. And it leads to them actually discussing things in a raid. And sometimes that can lead to a somewhat toxic environment when you're being a bit more direct. But it allows things to actually be discussed out in the open. What I see happen in a lot of North American guilds specifically is people don't really want to be the person that's bringing something up. People want to be too nice or something. But here's the problem. People are going to people. So if someone's making a mistake a lot, once I gotta clear my throat. If someone's making a ton of mistakes, everyone sees that. And it kind of needs to be addressed for other people to stop thinking about it. And if you leave things in your guild unaddressed by maybe you, the like leader or emotional leader or the raid leader, whatever, or like someone else who's like good with this kind of stuff, it needs to be addressed in front of all those people. Because what's going to happen if you don't is everyone's going to end the raid and they're all going to be thinking about it and probably talking about it in their groups of friends. And maybe you're fostering an environment where people are basically, because you're not handling things, people are going to handle it themselves and either shit talk that person to their face or to their group of friends. And it's like, oh, like nothing gets done in this guild. So, you know, like, oh, we ended the raid today. You guys see this guy just fucking ruining our whole night of progression. It like creates discord. It's just not good for a group of people. And it happens way too much, I think, in this region's guilds because of the need to want to maybe be everyone's friend or be nice. And you don't have to be an asshole. In fact, it's better. Would you rather have that person receive criticism from some random person in your guild or from you? Because it's going to happen. So get out ahead of it. Be respectful. Tell them what they need to hear. Let everyone else know it needs to be addressed, and it will foster confidence in your leadership and prevent your guildmates from having a bad time with each other. So that's just one tip I think I'd throw out for general guild management, since you kind of mentioned that under there.
One thing to add, I think, is, and you don't even need to be a guild leader to do this, but I think it's really, really important that you foster an environment where you take accountability when things go wrong. And you sort of like you said, where you wipe and then no one says anything. And by far, that is where the tilt starts to settle in and people get frustrated. Because for example, Fire Act, there's a part where you get the Dream Rend, you're being pulled in. It's really frustrating as a disc priest. I have to freaking press Dispel every 8 seconds. But like, if I just die, or like if we die and I just say nothing and I'm just steaming, right? It like no one even knows what's going on, right? But if I say, look, like this part's really hard for me. I'm trying to figure it out. I messed up my ramp there, or I was really trying to fit this global in and I stepped in a swirl. It lets other people go like, okay, like, just like you said, when you know what went wrong in that pull, then the next pull feels good because you're like, okay, this is what we're working on right now. And it's not just up to the raid leader, I think, because, I mean, let's be honest, when it's you know everything that's going on, all the different roles, you can identify those. For a civilian raid leader, they're not going to know every time what went wrong or how to make it better.
Yeah,
But
good
I think
point.
it's really important as one thing you can do though as a raid leader then is be that person of, okay, I messed up. This is what I did, and create that and try and encourage other people to do that too.
Mhm.
Don't be like, admit who was it? Don't make me check the logs. Like that was said many times this tier for our guild. But I think it's really important just to, be like, okay, this is what I did wrong. And the more people are doing that, the more it's like, okay, I know what happened there. Let's move on. And then when there is the rare situation of no one says anything, then as a raid leader, you're like, like maybe I, do what you said of, okay, I need to figure out what we need to learn here. How do we move forward from this tough part that no one seems to know?
Yeah, call an emergency meeting, right? Or it's like, does somebody know that they did something wrong there? Because if not, like we gotta figure something out. I do think that if you are in leadership, it's really valuable to like over admit your mistakes. Like if something's like
100%.
2080, you're not your fault.
100%.
You're gonna get a
fault
lot
for other people.
Right.
Literally, yeah, you're so right. Like and we had to do this early on too, because we formed from a bunch of different guilds. So as you can probably expect, different guilds are different levels of good at this. Right. So like we had to, I mean, dude, here's what you do. You make a mistake and it's like 80% someone else's fault and 20% your fault. But if you're in leadership and you're just like, that was my bad, and you just start the next poll, that person will never forget that because they know. And then they're way more likely to do that. And yeah, so you mentioned, the only reason I'm saying this is, Growl, you mentioned you don't have to be a leader. You can be the person, but it does kind of require they don't have to be officers. There are leaders of guilds that are not officers, right? And you can feel that. Those people have to be very vocally critical of themselves if you ever expect someone in your group to stand up in front of everyone and say, I fucked up, right?
Yep.
All right, legendary question. That was a good one. By the way, we are looking for more of those. So if you are a patron, put them in our Discord. We've got fish up some more questions. But I think that's going to be the end of our episode for this week. Growl, thanks for filling in for Dorky this week. You got any content, if you want to shout out or whatever, any places people to find you and stuff?
Nope, always on the grind on Twitch and YouTube at Yummy TV. And yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
All right. GG's. See everybody next week.
GG's.